Last class we built out the beginning, the basics, the front end of our Android Messenger app so that we have a location where we can type in information into the text box, an input, and we have a button that doesn't work yet to start new conversations. We have the general layout of our contact list, and we have a main section with a nav bar, a nice little bell, and a drop-down menu that allows us to sign in and sign out. But there's a few problems with our application as is right now. The first is that when we sign in, that works. You can sign in here. It might not sign you in completely, but if it does sign you in, you'll get something that looks like this, where you have some options to pick from. And it'll give you all of the user information of whoever signs in, their display name, their email, their photo ID, their photo URL, and their user ID, which will end up being very useful for us. Now the problem with this is that as of right now, there's no real way to tell that anyone is logged in here. I have my name hard-coded in, and we'll probably have to change that later, but there's no real way to tell if they're logged in. If you look at your Firebase console, you'll see that you have all the users who have signed into your application right here. And that's because in the sign-in method, under the authentication section, we enabled Google sign-in, and we made sure that preview.c9users.io is an authorized domain. So if you haven't done any of those things, make sure to do them. But right now, if we look at the database tab right here, you'll notice that we haven't set anything up. And so that's actually what we're going to do next. But before we do that, I want to show you one other issue. Now, when we get back this big object of information about our logged in user, we probably want to show, at least on our screen somewhere, that our user is signed in. And a good way to do that is to display an image, what we call like an avatar image of the user. And so we can do that by grabbing this photo URL string right here and then putting it into an image tag somewhere on our screen. And so we're going to do that first. I think that'll be the coolest way to show that someone's actually logged into our application. Okay? Now to do that, well actually the way we did that in the first place is in this firebase.js file, we wrote a little bit of code that does a few things. So I want to go over this really quickly. The firebase.js file, we first save this auth object here, which just connects us to the authentication service for Firebase. And the authentication service for Firebase is what allows us to log users in and out. Ooh, Belisa signed into my app also. Thank you, Belisa. I appreciate that. You might want to check, by the way, everybody, to make sure, you might want to check that you used your web setup information right here and not mine. If you were copying the information I sent out to you on Slack, you're probably using my Firebase information. You want to make sure that your Firebase information is in the head of your file. So if you click on the authentication tab and click on that web setup button right there, you'll see all of this information. You want to copy this and you want to put it in the head of your index.html file right up here. Because this is what connects your app, the index.html file of your app, to your Firebase database. And if you're using my Firebase database, then that's probably not good. You're probably going to continue to try and log into my app, and you'll get logged in here. Cool? So just as a heads up. Now, once we have connected to the authentication service for Firebase, we then create this new thing called a provider. And a provider is just an object that holds information about logging people in with Google. And we're going to give that to a function that's attached to our auth object called a method, this sign in with pop-up method. So as soon as we run this sign in with Google function, it's going to console.log sign in, and then it's going to run this function that signs in the user with a pop-up. You know when that pop-up appears on our screen? That's actually what's happening. We're signing in our user with a pop-up, And then if it works, if we get a result, we are storing the user's access token, which we don't actually need because we're not going to use it. And I'm actually going to change this var to a const because I like using const instead of vars. And we get the user object off of the result, and then we console.log it. And that is why whenever we sign in, we get this big object right here. This is the big user object. And the user object contains all the information about our user that Google gives us. So this is your actual Google account information. That's really useful because we can do all kinds of good things with that. Now in this case, all we really want to do is we want to sign in our user, and then we want to display, we want to update our UI with their avatar source. Basically like the avatar URL, the photo URL, which will be this thing right here. We want to take that image link and let's put an image right over this, replace these 3 dots with that image link. Cool? That's how we're going to show that users are signed into our application. Here's how we're going to do that. The first thing we want to do is right here, underneath const user. If we look when we console.log user, this big user object, if this whole thing is the user object, the way to get this link right here is to say user.photo URL. And so I'm going to say const avatar source is equal to user.photo URL. And by doing that, we can save the actual Google link, the link to the Google photo that everyone has on their Google accounts. And so we don't have to go have people upload a picture of themselves to our app. We can just use whatever picture they have already saved on Google. What's cool about that is then we're going to take this avatar source and we're going to pass it to a function. Let's call this function update UI for sign in. And we're going to pass it the avatar source like that. So whenever a user signs in, we're going to take this photo URL that we're calling a variable called avatar source, and we're going to give it to a function that we haven't written yet, but we're going to write in a second, that's going to update our UI and tell the user that they're logged in. So all it did is I've written 1 line of code right here. And let's also make sure actually to console.log that so we can make sure that it's working. So I'm going to console.log the user, I'm going to grab the avatar source, and I'm going to console.log the avatar source so I can make sure that I have it correct. Because if it says something like undefined or null, then we know we actually got it wrong, and we can go back and change our code. Now, the only way this works, this whole thing works, is that we have this button in our index.html that we call the sign in button. We gave it an ID of sign in button. So in your index.html over here, if you scroll down, we have this drop down menu right here, and one of them we gave an ID of sign in button. Do you all see that? That sign in button, we have an ID, and in our UI.js, we said const sign in button, and we selected it from the HTML document, and then we attached an event listener. So that as soon as someone clicks on it, we run the function called sign in with Google. That's what runs this function here, which then gets the user information and that photo URL. We're then going to take that photo URL and give it to another function. So there's 3 functions that are running here in a row. Each one of them does a different job. One of them signs the user in with Google, and one of them updates the UI, the user interface, our actual HTML file, for signed in user. And so in the UI.js, let's create that function. Down here, I'm going to say function update UI for sign in with the avatar source. And what we really want to do here with this update UI for the user interface, update the user interface for a logged in user, is we want to get the auth dropdown, and we want to set its inner HTML equal to an image with the source equals the avatar source that we have right here. And so all we really need to do is we come here and see how this thing right here, this is our 3 dots, our more vert. And this anchor tag has an ID of auth drop-down button. Do you see that? So we want to select that auth drop-down button, and we want to update it with some new stuff. And so here's how we're going to do it. Are you ready? In our UI.js, right above this, we're going to say const auth drop-down item is equal to document.querySelector auth drop-down button. And so we're selecting that button from the page, those 3 dots on the top right of our page. And in here, we're going to update the inner HTML. Is equal to, and we're going to create, you can use these backticks that are right above the tab key, or like right below the escape key. And we're going to create an icon, and inside that icon, we're going to put an image. Now, the reason I'm doing this is we're going to take this avatar source right here. We're going to take this link to that person's photo, and we're going to put it right in here. So whenever someone logs in, we're going to replace those 3 dots. Let me make that a little bigger so you can see. We're going to replace those 3 dots with this image tag. And this image tag is going to have a link to the user's photo. And so we just go ahead and interpolate the variable and put avatar source in there. And that should actually work, funny enough. That's really all we need to do. It might look silly for the time. Doesn't look like it does a lot, but it's a lot of the same stuff we've already written. And so now whenever the user signs in, whenever the user logs in, it should update the UI with this new image tag. And so I'll give you a second to copy that down, but I advise you just to try it out. Save your stuff, have you sign in again, and see if it works. So it's going to look terrible when we sign in, but it's going to work. And so that means we just need to add some styles to it. So if I refresh this, actually it's already refreshed, and I log the user in, and I click sign in, it's going to sign me in. Oh, what? What the heck happened here? Notice how it's like super big. It like takes over half the screen. That looks terrible, but it is the right photo, and it does take my photo, it does put it right there, right? So, and I can still click on it, and it'll still bring up the sign in, sign out drop down. And if I click sign out, it should sign me out still. And I click sign in, it should sign me back in. So we need to make some updates to this. But I think the only update we need to make right now is the style. And so let's give this image a class equals avatar-image. So once you have this class of avatar image, we just write a little bit of style, like this. Let's go down to, let's do it right below the nav wrapper, or right below the drop down. Let's just say .avatar-image, and let's give it a height of 50 pixels, a width of 50 pixels, and a border radius of 50%. And that'll actually do a lot of good stuff for it. That'll do most of the work. I think I want to give it some margin also, just some margin on the top so it moves down a little bit. And try this. If you update it like this, that should actually do a lot of the work you need to do. So in the image, give it a class of avatar image. And in the style.css, give it these styles right here. And then we'll come back together and see what it looks like. So let's take a look at what our application looks like now. When I sign someone in, it should do the whole sign-in process, and boom, check that out. Now it updates the user interface to clearly show that somebody's logged in. You see that? That's pretty nice. Now the problem is that when I sign out, it doesn't change that to show that I'm signed out again. So we need to update the user interface for sign out also. The other thing is, if I refresh this, even if I'm signed in, it goes away. And so we need to fix both of those things. And they're actually both not super hard fixes, but they will be a little complicated the first time you see it. Cool? So let's do that in the next video because this video is pretty long. I can also Slack out the code for you, so just let me know if you need it. Cool? Yes, perfect.